All right, it's still dark outside and wet. Testing out a new camera system, so you don't have to just, watch me sit and talk forever as usual. Hopefully I can move around a little bit because I got a couple of things to show you. Now, before I continue my series on the use of the Shin Gunto in Japanese swordsmanship, I wanted to cover a couple of things. Also, this is going to play into another video I recently recorded, and I've been a little hesitant to drop it. Kind of a controversial topic, but I wanted to take this video to demonstrate some of my experiences so you kind of know where I'm coming from. Now again, I don't consider myself any kind of teacher, expert, master, anything like that, but after 45 years having one of these in your hands, you learn some things. So let's cover a couple of things that I've learned in general terms, specifically about the ways that I've learned and practice on a regular basis to deploy this weapon. Now, I'm not talking about specific ryu schools, traditions. I'm not talking about the difference between iaido and kenjutsu kata or tamashigiri. I'm talking about actual use of the sword separated into what I consider 5 different categories based on how it's held and how it's used. So, the first of which is often referred to as omote, or outside, for a couple of different reasons. One is it's the style that's often shown outside of a traditional school or taught first to new students, so you'll probably recognize it. And there are 2 flavors of it, but I'm using the term outside in this condition as a description of range, combative distance, interval distance, measure. Using the sword in a way that it is taking best advantage of its reach, whether you're talking, cutting, thrusting, parrying. The sword is using the most of its length, and besides thrusting, you're focusing your cutting on the monouchi, right? Usually up here. This is also what you tend to do a lot in tamashigiri. It gives you the most speed and best use of the cutting, striking power, chopping power of the blade. So that all makes sense. Now my grip in this case is more of a handshake, right, which is what a lot of people are taught. And my arms tend to stay a little bit more away from my body. Now I said there's 2 versions of this because, well, most commonly you tend to use this sword in 2 hands, right? However, there is a katate, a one-handed version where you can use the sword effectively one-handed, where you can do a number of different movements. Now, I use this in a couple of different contexts. One, if I just want to train. In other words, good exercise, physical therapy. I will also, of course, practice then in my left hand to kind of get some balance. Now, and who knows what's going to happen to this hand in the future. I may be stuck with this one again for a while. I will also use it in combinations where, for me at least, especially with a longer handled sword, some 2-handed techniques cause me to bind up. And I may then freely shift back and forth between 2-handed techniques and 1-handed techniques, and you'll see that in use in a couple of different ways where I may just let go and put my hands back on. Another way I've learned how to use that would be in situations where I've got my sword extended and someone takes a cut from below at my arm, and I might suddenly just release and countercut, or release and get my sword back together with both hands. So yeah, so there are a couple of different reasons why you might need one hand on your sword. Also, dual wielding. If I've got another weapon like a wakizashi in this hand, well, yes, obviously I'm going to need to be able to use both weapons together. And like I said, the katana in one hand it's exercise. It's a lot easier to wield, a lot quicker, a lot more maneuverable, a lot more stable in many ways in 2 hands. But there's certain things it does really well in one hand. We're going to come back to that when we talk about Gunto and Tachi. Now, first 2. What's the third? You don't see this one as much, but I practice it a lot because, well, it appeals to me and it's kind of functional for me. And I've heard it described in different terms, one of which is te ura, hands inside or behind. And in this case, think about this. Why is the katana sharpened pretty much all the way down to here? And what can you do with that? Compared to a lot of Western swords where the fort is blunt. In Chinese swords it could be the same way, where this is really dedicated to parrying. You've often got a sharp edge that goes most of the way down. What could you do with that? Well, in very close quarters, again, outside would be, I'm assuming my opponent is at measure, over here basically, is where I'm expecting him. What if he closed very close to me? Either unexpectedly or otherwise, or maybe I closed very close to him. This is the same in any other kind of fighting. You might be fighting at reach, or you might be fighting very close in, grappling, something like that. I might have my opponent literally in kissing distance. In those situations, I'm going to assume more of a hammer grip, and instead of extended cutting, that you're going to see more draw cutting sort of actions that take advantage of the edge and the length of the blade, where I am cutting in here. Now you'll notice that when I do that, I maintain certain angles. I don't have quite the variety of techniques that I have in the extended style, but I'm also planning and designing all of my movements so they not only serve to cut and draw cut against the target, but I keep the sword positioned so it's also protecting me. It's parrying at the same time it's cutting. Musashi describes similar things in what he described the flowing water cut and the continuous cut in his treatise. So you may see me use the sword very close to myself. Now it does make a really strong draw cut, and it's very stable. It doesn't get really good power, like chopping, striking cuts, so it's not very good for tamashigiri, but close quarters, I find it makes the sword very useful, and again, in future videos, this is going to be critical. All right, what's the next way to employ deploy? Well, same kind of situation, very close range, and I talked about this in another video. What the Europeans call half-swording, or soite. Tori is one way I've heard it called in Japanese, where it refers to the characteristic arch of the Shinto shrine. But you won't see me doing any of the traditional arts when they do the really straight sort of blocking. What I'm again thinking is my opponent is really, really close to me, and I'm having to be literally hip to hip with them and able to deploy the sword to parry, protect myself, get in some close range slashing, cutting, while I've got kind of a shield up, be able to thrust very accurately and very strongly at very close range, very good at hitting those small targets, and also, it's not the most effective technique I found in actual fighting. It can be employed, though, would be sukaate, if I was to come in and hit with the kashira. But mostly, as I'm practicing and as I've been using this for fencing and other things, a lot of the times it's going to be like this. It's going to be, again, close range, almost pretty much grappling distance. So, those 4 ways I practice a lot. There is a 5th way that I'm not fond of, except in very, 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 very narrow applications. What am I talking about? Reverse grip. Gyakute. All right, you're probably rolling your eyes. Bear with me. Or you may be a fan. I don't know. I don't want to disrespect the fandom. But what I have discovered is that gripping the sword in the reverse position in a straight-up fight is pretty useless. I've tried it. I've trained with it. It's pretty. It's good exercise. It's great for demonstration. But against any kind of a skilled opponent, what I'll usually get as a response out of them is about 3 seconds of, as they try to figure out what the hell I'm doing, and then they take me apart. Because especially if they're using, one of the longer reach modalities, they've got a lot more tip speed, they've got a lot more leverage, they've got a lot more control, a lot more maneuverability. Yeah, they can just take me apart. One of the reasons why you're not seeing me whip the sword around in a reverse grip right now, one, my wrist doesn't really allow it. Two, I don't feel like I'm accurate enough with it not to kill the camera. However, what is reverse grip potentially useful for? Well, I've heard a couple of situations where, talked about this in some of the other videos, you might need to get your sword in your hand in a hurry, and there were certain etiquette situations where you might have the sword laying next to you on the right side, you might have to draw it all of a sudden, you might have it over here, or in some other weird way you might have to grab it suddenly, or maybe draw it with your left hand or something because your right hand was busy or you were trying to do something tricksy. Whatever that happens to be, yeah, limited application. A couple of ways, though, I was taught to deploy it that made a little bit more sense. And these are more historic in context, probably nothing I'm ever going to get a chance to use in any kind of straight up fencing, sparring, whatever. And these go to battlefield techniques. The idea would be, I am injured. I'm still ambulatory, but I'm fading out. Maybe I've lost the use of my primary arm. I need to get out of there. So one of the things I might do is shift the sword into my left hand and use it. Well, if I'm really in bad shape, I might have to use it as a cane, but I don't want to sheath it and I don't want to drop it. I want to keep it handy so that if anybody suddenly rushes me, I have at least a shot at blocking it. Now, the other similar way this would be used would be if I am dragging someone off the battlefield. Now, that could be a wounded companion or my superior that I need to rescue. I'm not going to throw somebody in armor over my shoulders, especially if there's incoming fire. That's going to put them in more danger. I'm going to keep them close to the ground and drag them by their armor. I'm going to get down low, probably too, and try to get out of there as quickly as I can. And I may decide to put my sword in this hand this way, again, just in case if somebody breaks through, takes a swing at me, I have a chance to block that in a hurry and then drop the person I'm carrying and shift it to a proper fighting stance, so it'll give me that extra split-second response time. Could also be I'm dragging a prisoner. And if that prisoner then becomes non-compliant, well, let's see, I can make my point. Now, I've also seen it used for close range, like finishing thrusts to an opponent on the ground. Well, I don't do that in martial arts practice. I'm not sitting here doing a ritual as mimicking, putting somebody out of their misery. I know a lot of Ryuha actually do that. Another place I see it used frequently, which I was actually trained in and moved away from because I didn't like it, was when you see people do, and I don't have the sai in my hand, so this looks weird, doing noto, sheathing from the reverse grip, right? You may or may not practice this. I don't like it. I'm sorry, I don't like it, because my thought, going back to even some of my early teachings in this, was that as you are resheathing the blade, you are still maintaining combat awareness, right? So why would I want to put my sword in a position where it's harder to use? Why wouldn't I want to resheath it in the same position that I would be wielding it? And this would be the same as I do handgun work, concealed carry. I'm not going to flip my gun around upside down to stick it back in my sheath. Yeah, there's some gunslinger techniques that are kind of fancy that do that, but yeah, reholstering my weapon, it's going to be in my grip in the firing position just in case I need to change my mind and have it back out again. So yeah, I'm not going to use reverse grip in noto, sheathing. So where else might I use it though? Well, my practice of Chinese martial arts. Any of you who practice at least modern forms of Chinese Jen, whether it's Tai Chi, Kung Fu, whatever, one of the things you're going to see in a lot of the modern forms is that you start from the reverse grip, and then some of the initial moves of your form are often variations of some kind of, again, emergency close range parry, potentially thrust or slash, right? But you very quickly transfer it into your primary grip and continue from there. Now, with something like Chinese Dao, similar. A lot of their forms are started actually cradling the sword, which, again, it's a single-edged sword, so you're not necessarily going to cut yourself. And you might employ it for a couple of quick little techniques, maybe a jab with the pommel, or maybe coming in with a thrust or something like that. But again, very quickly, it's going to be in the other hand, right? and then you might, as a formality, put it back away when you finish your form. But otherwise, yeah, not something I'm going to deploy commonly. Now, like I said, I'm going to reflect back on these as I talk about the Shin Gunto in katana-based Japanese swordsmanship, and I'm going to start comparing this to other forms of swordsmanship. What is it good at? Where does it have some potential vulnerabilities? And being a good martial artist, martial scientist in my mind, it's what I kind of call myself. Where are the vulnerabilities? And how can I compensate for those? So, until those videos, I hope you at least found this interesting, useful, informative, and I hope to, as usual, see you again.